Welcome to Talking Out Your Glass. I'm Sean Wagoner. An artist and educator, C. Matthew Szösz has established a practice that revolves around experimentation and investigation of techniques and material, with a focus on understanding the ways in which physical objects and events transform into intellectual and emotional experiences. He operates and is interested in the space that exists between design, craft, and fine art. Wrote William Warmus in Glass, the UrbanGlass Art Quarterly. So each Szösz project represents a unique inquiry into outcomes driven by curiosity, inspiration, and technical opportunity. Attempting to wrestle these diverse series into unified categories is to limit the creative variation and diversity of each, to try to name the style. Perhaps it is best to list some of his most important investigations, summarize the findings, and enjoy the artifacts of Szösz's subversive and yet disciplined and meticulous process. End quote. Since receiving his MFA in Glass from Rhode Island School of Design, Szösz has been recognized internationally with awards such as the Irvine Borowski Prize, the Yada Cooney Franz Prize, and a Tiffany Foundation grant, and has completed numerous residencies in the U.S., Europe, Asia, and Australia. He enjoys working as an educator and has taught at Rietveld Academy, Virginia Commonwealth University, University of Washington, University of Hawaii, Pilchuck Glass School, Penland School of Craft, and Bildwerk Frauenau, among others, and has lectured and given numerous workshops around the world. He is the founding member of the curatorial group Hyperopia Projects and was executive director of Public Glass, a nonprofit public access studio in San Francisco. Szösz's work has been exhibited nationally and internationally and is represented in private collections and public institutions in the United States, Australia, Europe, and Japan, including at the Corning Museum of Glass, the Renwick Gallery, the Toyama City Museum of Glass, and Glazenhuis in Belgium. His career has allowed him to meet and work with friends, colleagues, and collaborators across 4 continents and dozens of institutions. He currently lives in Seattle with his wife, Anna Maslovsky. Recently, Szösz completed an IASPIS residency in Sweden, administered by the International Arts Grants Committee there. Later in the year, he will work at a residency in Lisbon, organized by Maria Morales Lam through her studio Low Invisible. In the next 2 years, he will be visiting a pair of universities in China and teaching at Pilchuck Glass School in the summer of 2027. In between, Szösz is finishing up a commission for SeaTac Airport that has been the main focus of his practice for the past 3 years. The project, titled Jonah, converts a part of SeaTac's North Main terminal, an escalator well, and a surrounding mezzanine into a highly abstracted version of Jonah's well. The installation has been broken into 2 parts, a larger, more architectural part that creates 2 articulated glass walls that form the body of the whale, which was installed in December, and a more sculptural part that is scheduled for installation in September, a suspended, lighted piece that roughly corresponds to a whale's mouth holding a pearl. Says Szösz, there are a number of metaphors and associations between the Jonah story and air travel, and I particularly like the idea of the whale being a meta-space, something that has a long tradition in stained glass. I was also attracted to the apocalyptic overtones of the Jonah story in view of the current American political and environmental situation. End quote. In contrast, the personal objects and videos Szösz creates are the result of performance-based experiments documenting a deep knowledge and unbridled desire to allow the material to lead him. The artist describes his practice as, quote, an attempt to maximize serendipity and to allow a project to be guided by material and consequence, arriving, in the end, in an unfamiliar and unpredicted landscape. A successful project should not only be surprising, but should also achieve an identity independent of the artist and to at least some degree escape his control and mastery. Many thanks to the sponsors of this episode of Talking Out Your Glass. His Glassworks Incorporated, Penland School of Craft, Bullseye Glass Company, Heller Gallery, Shot, Wet Dog Glass, and the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass. To find out more about our sponsors, visit talkingoutyourglass.com. Click on Episodes, Season 11, and Matthew Szösz. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to Talking Out Your Glass's new YouTube channel. But I sort of think of your work as kind of the Radiohead of glass work, in that there aren't very many things in the music world that are absolutely original, and they might draw, on things from the past, but you can't really hear them. It all sounds like it's a totally new idea, and that's how I think of your work. Reminds me of that same feeling.
Well, that's quite a compliment.
Yeah.
I can handle that.
Okay, well, I might tell you that.
That sounds very good.
Matthew Szösz, thank you so much for joining me on Talking Out Your Glass podcast.
Thank you, Sean, for inviting me and having me here.
You recently completed an IAS-PIS residency in Sweden. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the ASPIS residency is it's a wonderful opportunity that the Swedish International Artists Fund, the internal Swedish Arts Grant Committee. It's the people that give out individual artist grants and institutional artist grants in Sweden. Has a residency, and they invite 4 Swedish artists and 4 international artists across all of the various media, and the idea for the international artists is basically just to come there and talk to the Swedish artists and the Swedish art community, and kind of it's a way to internationalize the Swedish practice a little bit, and what that actually means is that they give you a bunch of nice things like a studio and an apartment and some money, and they ask nothing in return other than that you be there and talk to them. So it's very nice. I had 3 months in Stockholm, and I enjoyed it very much.
Well, your parents were both artists. Talk a bit about them and your childhood. Did you know from a young age that you would be a maker or an artist?
Yeah, so my father primarily was a RISD professor for a little over 50 years. He got the job at right out of grad school in his early 20s, and kept it until he died. So I grew up around art. He was a medalist and a monument maker, mostly a bronze sculptor. But he could do just about anything. And he taught foundation and industrial design and occasionally sculpture classes. He was a figurative sculptor. And he was a huge influence. He's one of those people that you could never get ahead of. He was always, he always had the correct answer, whether you liked it or not. And yeah, it kind of meant that RISD was always in my future when I was a teenager. And I started going to RISD at 6 or 7. My father would bring me in to grade sophomore design projects. They had to build collapsible children's furniture. And if I could put it together and use it, you passed. And if I couldn't, you didn't. So there was a lot of bribery involved, which was very nice. But yes, my father was a huge influence on my way of thinking. I think I ended up being a very different artist than him, but there's a lot of things that about the way that I work and kind of the questions that I ask. And he was somebody that never took a day off. He would go to the studio on Christmas and never really took a vacation. And probably, unfortunately, that's something he passed down to me, as well as a complete dissatisfaction with anything that wasn't either completely perfect or completely his. He had a lot of trouble delegating, which is something I've definitely inherited. Yeah, and that I still am very fond of the smell of plasticine from his studio and from my childhood, which nobody else really likes. but I do.
Well, your art education took place primarily at RISD. Did you explore furniture design before glass?
Yeah, so originally I was an industrial design student, and the RISD Industrial Design Department is pretty fantastic. For the most part, the design, architecture, interior design, graphic design, industrial design are really the strong departments at RISD. There are a couple others. The glass department there is fantastically good. I'd gone there to. I've always liked to make things, and so I'd gone there intending to be a sculptor and kind of make things. And you get a foundation year there where they teach the basics, and you get to kind of look around and choose what major you want to be. And I had seen what the sculpture students were making, and I had seen what the design students were making when they graduated, and I went directly to design, just because it kind of. And I think I would still make the same decision, and I'm glad I did. The industrial design department kind of taught me how to make anything out of anything. It was a very kind of physical, very material-based design department that had kind of been founded by a lot of men who were educated in the 40s and 50s with a very strong kind of craft background overlap, where you pay attention to the material and you follow what the material is doing to make your design decisions. And it was really kind of like a shadow craft department in a number of different materials. And I got very into wood, and I was making a lot of wood furniture. And then kind of right about the time that I graduated, I decided that I didn't want to be a cabinet maker in New England, because at the very least, it was daunting. And then I'd gone to art school to make art, and I went looking for artists to work for. And just by luck, I ended up making molds for Dan Clayman, which was a wonderful experience. Dan's a fantastic guy, and very, very thorough. And then Dan traded me to Michael Shiner to do some work for him, which is a completely different experience, and also wonderful. And kind of by then I'd gotten kind of not trapped in glass, but enmeshed, hooked, netted, not necessarily by the material, but more by the people involved. Both Dan and Michael are very kind of dynamic, interesting people, and it also, kind of one of my reasons for not wanting to be a cabinet maker in New England is that there were so many of them, and all of them kind of like worked in these shops and just, where they worked very hard for kind of very small margins, and just kind of exuded anxiety most of the time. And glassmakers were kind of the opposite. They worked very hard, and they didn't have any money, but they seemed to be having an enormous amount of fun, and traveling a lot. And that seemed great. So I ended up working for glass workers for the next almost 10 years, I think, before I went back to graduate school, and then started making my own work. That was actually nice in a number of ways. It meant that I didn't go back to graduate school until I really needed to go back to graduate school, and I really wanted to be there. And once I was there, I could kind of I knew how to do anything I wanted to do. So the questions were much more about, why am I doing this? What is it? What's the reason for me being here? And how is this a viable way to live your life? Than it was, why is my mold failing? So it was a very useful graduate school experience in that way, mostly because of all of that extra time. I was a little late. I was maybe too interested in fun in my 20s, and didn't get things together quick enough, but I regret nothing.
There's no such thing as too interested in fun. Well, so what do you think set you up to be more of an explorer than an artist expressing in a singular way or method?
Well, one thing is that I never learned to use glass properly. I couldn't blow glass, and I never got the foundational kind of glass introduction. So everything that I was doing with it was something that I brought from somewhere else. Treating glass like plywood or like fabric or like any of a number of different things, and kind of the thought processes from an ex-design student were a bit different than those of somebody who'd been raised. Is particularly in glass blowing, it's so demanding that there really isn't room for errors. So you really tend to learn exactly these steps to do that thing. And you really have to master that before you can start improvising and playing jazz with it. I was kind of forced immediately to just make up whatever I was doing because I didn't know any of the kind of the traditional making things the right way. So that was part of it. And the other part is that I've never been interested in making things to please other people. I've only ever, I can't. I get bored and I wander away. I've only ever been able to make things that I'm curious about, that I'm interested in, that are kind of new to me. That kind of impatience and desire for novelty has kept me experimenting with things. And if I'm not challenging myself, then I get grumpy.
So what have been some of the most groundbreaking residencies for you in terms of developments in your own work?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I mean, residencies are often a fantastic time to be very productive. And they can be very experimental. One of the problems with residencies is that they end, and they often don't end when your experiments are finished. So I've left an enormous number of half-finished projects around the world at different residencies. But I think for me, some of my favorite residencies were Wheaton Arts under Hank Adams. It was a fantastic experience. That they were completely broke, had no resources at all, but it was also completely free. And there's nothing else in the town of Millville that you want to spend any time with other than the glass studio. So it was an opportunity to just be enormously productive, and Hank would let people do anything they wanted. I would rebuild equipment for specific projects, have access to, I think there was 27 kilns or something at Wheaton, because Hank was a kiln caster, and there were several of them that you could fit 4 or 5 people in. So just kind of the amount of freedom and improvisation that was kind of, because there was no equipment, you had to make everything yourself and fix everything that you wanted to use, and that just kind of leads to, it's always been my experience that kind of leads to experimentation. A lot of what I do is kind of experimenting with process to see if I can change the available outcomes of whatever I'm doing. And that can happen intentionally or it can happen accidentally. And usually, actually, the accidental ones are better. So Wheaton was fantastic in that it was incredibly nurturing to that kind of experimentation. And Hank also he's a razor-sharp mind when it comes to art, and has excellent ability and no filter in telling you what he thinks about whatever you're doing. Starworks was actually a great residency in North Carolina. Joe Grant and Eddie Bernard in the background. was a wonderful time, and it was also something where I didn't really have. It's primarily a glassblowing residency, so there was not a bunch of kilns or kind of the equipment that I usually use. So I ended up improvising things, and ended up with actually a very nice project that I liked. I built a glass iceberg that floats in the sock factory at Starworks. That was kind of the beginning of a bunch of other kind of ways of making things. That's currently what I've been obsessing with. But yeah, there's a number of different residencies that were very good. The VCU, I did the Fountainhead craftsperson in residency, which was a year at VCU with Jack Wax, and the VCU has a fantastic art department. For anybody that doesn't know, it's the #1 sculpture program in the country, and their craft department is excellent. The jewelry with Susie Ganch and Jack Wax. That was a very kind of productive time. It was also really nice to talk to and live with the fine artist in residence, Reese Hemsworth, and the sculpture department there at VCU. I talked to a number of people there, and kind of hung out with and kind of developed things. It was a little bit more of like a stealth intellectual residency. I was very busy making a lot of stuff, but it's a very smart place, and I got a lot out of it. I don't know. My first residency was the Pilchuck Emerging Artist Residency, and that was really nice. I mean, Pilchuck in general is its own phenomenon, and I think particularly for younger people. I don't know if it's still kind of upholding this standard, but it was an incredible place to meet and be accepted into a community of glassworkers. And probably, you do learn an enormous amount. It's very intense, 2.5, 3 weeks, a summer session. You do learn an enormous amount, but I think that the really valuable thing are the fact that you're kind of meeting people from all over the world and all over the country that are serious about glass and are going to be there in some way or other for the next 20, 30 years, and will be contacts for you that you will keep for the rest of your life. And you get to make very good friends with them in that atmosphere. I think that the social aspect of Pilchuck is enormously important to what it actually does, as much as the kind of technical teaching, the fostering of art glass. I had a very good residency at the Glazenhuis in Belgium, in Lommel, which was relatively short, but very welcoming and very experimental in kind of its look. Playing around with Europe has a very different attitude towards glass, and a very kind of different way of teaching and forming glass makers. They're in a little bit of a crisis right now, since a lot of that, the way that they've been training people to work with glass, which is primarily kind of through the industry, is faltering and breaking down. But the kind of idea work and conceptual work that's part of the European art scene and the European glass scene leads to kind of very interesting, very kind of like specifically flavored projects that are very nice.
You're married to fellow artist Anna Maslovsky. How did the two of you meet, and what has your working relationship been?
Yes, I'm very, very lucky. I met Anna at Pilchuck when she was an undergraduate at the Danish Royal Academy on Bornholm in their glass program, which is another fantastic glass program that I've done a residency with, which is lots and lots of fun. I think I was working as an artist assistant for Stellark, which was an experience. Anyway, I met her at Pilchuck, and we hit it off very well. And then she went back to Denmark, and I stayed in the U.S. And she kind of insisted that we continue to have a relationship, and made it happen. Booked herself another trip to the U.S. and made me. I think it was Skype was the only available video call. I had a video call with her almost every day for the next 4 years, and I'm very glad she did.
So have the two of you collaborated on works?
No, we don't collaborate. We work for each other. I help her with her projects. She helps me with my projects. But our two personalities both kind of demand that one of us is in charge most of the time. And we often have different opinions about things, which is exactly how it should be, I think, at least for us. One of the things that I've always been really fascinated with Anna is that she's got a very kind of different way of... She's very perceptive, and she's got a very different way of thinking about things than almost anybody else. So she'll see things very, very differently than me, and point out details and relationships that aren't the first ones that I jump to. And that's really rewarding. It's great for conversations and for kind of broadening my horizons, but it also means that we're also very independent when it comes to what we like to see at the end of the day in the artwork. So it works much better with one of us making the decisions and the other one carrying them out. That being said, we do kind of... I don't think I've done a project without her assistance, and I don't think she's done very many without mine, unless we're in separate countries, which is fairly often, since I met her.
You're a founding member of the curatorial group Hyperopia Projects. Tell us about it.
Well, Hyperopia Projects was something that, in some ways, it was a luxury after graduate school. And the original, it was a luxury because we had time to do that, and I don't think any of the people that were involved with it still have the kind of free time and free energy that it took to. So we didn't do an enormous amount of stuff. We did something about every couple years, but each project took a lot of energy and work to kind of put together, and I think that that's eventually what killed it. But it was really a really nice exercise and a really nice exploration while we were doing it. The original members were myself and Helen Lee and Alex Rosenberg, and I put it together, and I chose the two of them because they were two people that worked very differently than I did and made very different decisions about things. I didn't want it to be like three people that thought the same way. Helen in particular, her and I have never had an easy relationship. We've disagreed about pretty much everything ever. But she's incredibly professional. She's really perceptive. She's very thoughtful, and is really a great person to work on a project with, because she won't accept anything that isn't the best. And Alex is the same way in a very different vein. He's very kind of physical about what he does, and really makes a practice through his hands, but he also makes kind of very smart intellectual pieces. So that kind of that group of three people that really had very different approaches to glass was really a nice thing to work with, and it was actually really rewarding to. The first thing we did was we put a show together called Superposition it was ancillary to one of the glass conferences actually here in Seattle, and it was kind of a survey of everybody coming out of graduate programs around the country. There were a few other things, but that's kind of what it turned into once we started sorting through all the applications, and it was actually really fantastic to get to see what was getting produced in Japan, Australia, Europe, and the U.S. At the same time. It was kind of our own little new glass review, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed all of the projects that we put together as a group.
We'll return to Matthew Szösz in just a moment. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by His Glassworks Incorporated, diamond tools and glass cold working supplies. Suppliers of diamond-plated tools and accessories, including diamond laps, wheels, belts, and adhesives. Expert advice available at hisglassworks.com. This episode is sponsored by Penland School of Craft, a national center for craft education dedicated to the creative life. Located in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, Penland offers residential workshops of various lengths in glass and other media. The school also has artist residencies and a gallery. For more information, visit penland.org. This episode is sponsored by the team at Bullseye Glass Company, leaders in the development of tested compatible colored glass for stained glass, kiln casting, fusing, torch working, and mosaics. To explore their enormous color palette, visit a Bullseye Resource Center near you or locate a dealer at bullseyeglass.com. And now, back to Matthew Szösz. In 2008, you made rope out of glass fiber that is flexible enough to tie or knit. How did you do that, and what did you do with the rope?
Yes, I've been thinking about that a fair amount, thinking about working with it again. That rope was something that it took a while to figure out. Quite a few years, actually. I think it started in 2008, but I don't think I made anything with it until around 2012. I first started trying to make. There are these wonderful ropes that go around Japanese Shinto temples called shimenawa that are made out of rice fiber, and they're huge, and they have these fantastic kind of taut, pregnant shapes that are still kind of draped, and I really liked the way that the form was being created by those things. So I was trying to figure out how I could do that with glass, with something that would kind of reflect and transmit light in a very different way. But there's some kind of fundamental differences between rice fiber and glass, and so that was very frustrating for a very long time. I think when I was at Wheaton, I built a stringer pulling machine, and I was pulling glass thread from the furnace, and it took a long time to accumulate anything of any size, and it was very brittle. So there were a lot of kind of iterations of playing around with glass fiber to see what could happen, and then kind of almost accidentally I'd been playing around with fiberglass and fired it a few times, and it behaves very, very differently when it's fired from other kind of glass materials. Blowing glass and casting glass, they're all kind of designed to flow very nicely, and that means kind of when you fire them, they melt and turn into glass blobs, melted strings. That was kind of something I'd been playing with an earlier project where I was making glass lace. I kind of built a spirograph with a crucible mounted in it, and I would make doilies, which was a lot of fun. But the fiberglass has so much surface area and so little mass that when you fire it, it really doesn't move. So you could fire things and you would still get all of the detail of the fabric. It would look like a piece of fabric, and it was just made out of glass. And so I started playing around with that, and it was really the real challenge was just finding the actual material that behaved well. and that turned out to be kind of the cheapest, ugliest, nastiest industrial fiberglass available. I use something that's called gun roving, which is made for a chopper gun. It's what they kind of make like shower surrounds and Corvettes, and maybe not Corvettes, but cheap fiberglass boats, things like that out of. And it's a very inconsistent material. There's very low quality control, but it actually works really well, and it's made to be very relatively flexible. And so I use that, and then kind of the oldest rope making technology in the world. So I make rope out of that, kind of the way the British Navy made rope. Figured out how to color it and all that thing, and kind of the nice thing, the great thing about glass in general, it's kind of demonstrated by that project, is that the material does all the work. Glass is an incredibly virtuous material. It's actually difficult to make it look bad. In that particular case, it was really just about finding the right iteration of glass, which is something that it's just kind of a slightly different way of approaching glass than a lot of glass artists. And it's indicative of one of the other residencies that I had a chance to do that wasn't actually my residency, it was Anna's residency, was the Corning Specialty Glass residency, which is a residency where Corning, over 6 months, gives you a series of week-long visits to their Sullivan Park research laboratories and the scientists there, which is phenomenal. There's so much knowledge in that one building about anything to do with glass or any kind of ancillary procedure to it, and that's just the stuff that they'll let you actually have access to, which is generally speaking kind of things that they sorted out between the 40s and the 80s, which is an enormous amount of stuff. But one thing that's really interesting about the scientists there, as glass workers or glass blowers, when we have problems, we practice harder and we adjust our tools, and we kind of like make jigs and make other tools to get the glass to do what we want. The scientists just change the glass. They just start with the chemistry until they've got a glass body that does the thing that they want. And that's their approach to kind of solving those problems. And it's incredibly effective. It's not cheap or anything that you can kind of do on your own. But it's kind of one of the keys to understanding glass as a material is that it can do almost anything. And simply, it's not one material, it's millions of materials. So simply finding the right kind of glass to do the thing that you want to do is often the best and easiest solution. And you just let the glass do all the work. Which works very nicely, and that is kind of what the rope project is. And the rope project, in some ways, design projects and kind of the way I work in general requires problems, requires obstacles, and kind of requires things to overcome in order to either go in different directions or kind of parameterize what you're making. In other words, get like a framework for the objects and kind of a formal language established. Most of those formal languages are kind of established by the difficulties inherent in the process. Like glass blowing, you make circular things that are about yay big, and all of that variation in there, and all of the things that glassblowers do to create detailing and create form are all part of that bubble blowing and reheating process, and they're all kind of established by the difficulty of doing that particular process. You don't get to make whatever you want. and that was one of the problems with rope, is I could kind of just make whatever I wanted. And once the inherent problem of like getting the rope to work was solved, you're kind of left with this question of, what do I make out of it that isn't just arbitrary. I don't know that I've solved that, and I don't know that I've quit working on it, but I've definitely gotten distracted. And it's also that rope making process and the weaving of the rope is both very time consuming and very unpleasant, as you can imagine. The more you work with it, the more it sheds glass fiber, and it'll turn an area of your studio and all the clothes that you're wearing uninhabitable very quickly.
So I assume it's a little bit dangerous health-wise as well to work with it.
Compared to a lot of the other things we work with as glass people, not so much. It's probably not as bad as melting batch, but or just handling silica dust if you're a kiln worker or a mold maker. Kind of one of the nice things about the glass fibers is they're relatively large. They're uncomfortable, but they're pretty easy to filter out. Just a paper mask will do kind of everything you're doing. You're not dealing with something that's microns that you will inhale and that will stay in your body for the next 40 years. I'm just guessing, but I would guess that it's considerably less health impactful than smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, which is kind of my go-to cutoff line.
Well, describe and discuss your glass lace.
One of the impetuses, there's a few different kind of like go-to ideas in terms of coming up with different projects and new things, or like ways of creating new ideas. One of them is old industrial processes that you can kind of free from their original function to make art out of it instead of making the particular item that was. And those tend to be really kind of interesting and often overlooked or unused processes for glass making. But the lace kind of comes out of another thing, which is just like, being around glass and working with glass, you find a lot of little behaviors that it does that could be investigated further and could be kind of harnessed or developed or just kind of like looked at differently. And the glass lace is just from this kind of these wonderful kind of surface tension squiggles that really hot glass makes. It drips like honey, and you get this great kind of doodle that the glass makes on the ground. And that behavior, that kind of thing is very particular. And the fact that it turns into a solid almost immediately is also very particular to glass. And initially I did a project where I had this thing that was kind of like a giant garlic press with a bicycle wheel attached to it that I mounted a crucible in. You could squeeze the glass out through the bottom of the crucible, and you could draw lines with it, and very large lines. And the glass would have this wonderful little kind of line quality left behind and burned into whatever you dripped it on. So that was kind of one way of like looking at that behavior of glass and thinking about drawing or printmaking and the kind of like their obsession with line marks and the way that marks are made and kind of the nature of things. And seemed to be something that glass did very naturally on its own. And you could capture this little behavior of glass in the marks that it made, or that it produced. And then I was looking for a way to make an object out of that would kind of take that detail and translate it into a three-dimensional thing that was appropriate to the detail, so that like kind of the object itself and the particular behavior that I was working with had this kind of relationship where they were appropriate to each other, and kind of trying to use that to mimic kind of lace patterns was something that was interesting, and the doilies were kind of one of the few ways you could do it in a controlled enough and quickly enough object to be able to physically get the glass to do that and preserve it in a way that worked. And it also kind of gave this opportunity to add complexity where you're using that line quality inside a larger pattern, kind of the way lace has all this detail and all of this, but still all this kind of like geometric structure to it, which was kind of satisfying, and it was also fun, and there was a lot of kind of like technical problem solving that had to be done in order to like get it to flow long enough and then get it into the kiln in such a way that it would survive, at least for a little while. None of them survived for very long. It was not. It's not a durable product, and it satisfied a lot of kind of like technical complication issues, which made it interesting to produce, and the results were fun as well.
We'll return to Matthew Szösz in just a moment. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by Schott. From showcasing priceless works of art with BoroFloat specialty glass to enabling advanced optics, semiconductors, and scientific applications, Schott combines technical precision with innovative design to help shape the world around us. For more information, visit schott.com/BoroFloat. This episode is sponsored by Wet Dog Glass. In business since 1996, Wet Dog Glass delivers unsurpassed value to glass studios like the Corning Museum of Glass and others around the globe. Offerings include turnkey hot glass studio equipment, studio planning consultation, and technical support. Wet Dog Glass, your studio's best friend. For more information, visit wdg-us.com. Since 1973, Heller Galleries played a critical role in promoting contemporary art and design, employing glass as its touchstone medium, exhibiting the premier artists incorporating glass in their practice. Numerous artworks have entered prestigious public collections as a direct result of Heller exhibitions. After a sequence of 7 Manhattan locations, in June of 2024, Heller closed its last brick-and-mortar space and began active programming in guest venues. Solo exhibitions for Tutsinski, Christina Bothwell, Bertil Verleen, and Sidney Cash, whose exhibition is currently on view in the Robert Lehman Gallery at UrbanGlass Brooklyn, clearly demonstrate Heller Gallery's continuing role as a valued resource for artists, museums, and collectors worldwide. For more information, visit hellergallery.com. And now, back to Matthew Szösz. So do you think the machines you invent to make your art are also art themselves?
Well, the nature of art is I think a bit less tangible. Art is something that we need to define for ourselves in every particular art practice, like what it is and what we're actually doing. And I don't try to assess whether or not my final products are art or not. I kind of just focus on being someone that's always curious about the relationship of humans to their world around them, and what that actually says about us, and kind of how we define ourselves and what we choose in terms of our values. Those are kind of like the fundamental lessons of our life, how we choose those things. And art is a thing that you get to be a professional studier of that particular behavior of humans, and think about the ways that we define ourselves as a people, as individuals, as cultures, and it's really kind of art is the process of thinking, really, and how we do that and how we express those thoughts to other people. it produces all of these kind of interesting objects and interesting ways of talking to other people. Art, often doesn't use language in the same way that writing or speaking uses language, which is, I think, a great virtue. As soon as you're using a particular language, you're entering into this very complex and culturally referential framework of expressing ideas. Just grammar itself does an enormous amount to the way that we actually get thoughts across to one another. Art kind of abandons that in that, it's speaking through visual images, it's speaking through objects, it's speaking through the relationships of objects in space and the interaction of people and objects. And that it does two things. One is that it makes it vague, which I also think is, or not vague, but open to interpretation, which I think is a great virtue. It demands that whoever's looking at it do at least a little bit of the work of figuring out what it means to them, what it means to the people around them. And it also allows it to kind of speak in a language that does not require interpretation. It's kind of an language that all humans can respond to in certain ways. So I don't worry too much about whether my objects are, and there's a bunch of different ways of defining art. One of my favorite ones was an object that's made for thinking, or something that's that's made as a tool for thinking. Currently, I just tend to think of art as the opposite of war. It is creation rather than destruction. It is empathy rather than hate. And we should perhaps examine what we want to fund with our institutional and societal dollars. If we want to fund peace and thought, or the opposite. All right, and that's probably as far down that road as I want to go. But yeah, I'm not concerned about whether or not my machines are art. I'm much more kind of concerned about how the whole picture looks. A lot of the things that, if you look me up on the internet, you'll see a number of different videos. And I don't really produce those as, there are occasional exceptions, but they're not performances, and they're not really, they're certainly not narrative videos typically. But they're more about kind of just taking the viewer and bringing them into the studio so that they can kind of see what I'm seeing while I'm doing it. Because a lot of the things that are kind of the most entertaining for me and that keep me interested and that kind of like keep me excited and curious are things that happen in the studio, and they happen kind of unexpectedly. There's those kind of moments of magic where the physical objects that you're working with do something that you didn't expect, or undergo a change that's kind of profound and transformational. That's really, and it's that intersection of physical things and the way that you're thinking about them at the same time that's really kind of the thing that interests me the most. I mean, we do it all the time with everything around us and the objects that we make. But there's some that like really stand out to me as this kind of like intersection of the physical world and the intellectual world. And maybe an example would be like a record, like recording a record, particularly like recording onto wax, which just starts out as this needle and this piece of wax that's taking in the vibrations of sound, and then plays them back, and it's this kind of physical miracle that you're getting sound back out of a lump of wax, but it also it's your mother's voice, or it's a piece of music, or it's a political speech that has these kind of profound emotional effects that are all still just coming out from that lump of wax, and those kind of magical moments of transition between the physical, the intellectual, and the emotional that happen within an object or within a short space of time in relation with objects in relation to each other, in relation to people. Those are kind of the things that I'm most fascinated with in terms of trying to figure out, like, that seems the thing that's the closest to what I'm trying to achieve during my life. Whether or not that's art is up to other people, but that's what I spend my time trying to do, that and trying to convince people to pay me to do it more often.
You unveiled your inflatables at a landmark exhibition held at Heller Gallery in New York City in 2019. Describe and discuss that series of work.
So inflatables are something that have been around for a while and kind of gone through a bunch of things. There's something that the glass students are endlessly fascinated with, and most of the wider world couldn't care less about, which is is kind of a good summation of most of my practice. So the inflatables just came from kind of a simplified idea of, could I put an air bubble into float glass? And there have been other people that have done that. Tom Petty comes to mind. I didn't actually know about him when I was first trying to do this, and I did it in a much more kind of primitive way. But the thing that I've always found really nice about them is that when you transform from the flat pattern that you've put together to a three-dimensional object, the forms really undergo this really interesting and nice transformation where they're producing much more kind of complex curves than you're drawing. All of my initial inflatables drawings were just like a bunch of squares that would stack together and then inflate. And all of the kind of curves and kind of like the kind of soap bubble architecture of the pieces would just come out of the behavior of the glass under tension and kind of the way that three-dimensional shapes are made. And the thing that I really liked about that is that it had those things that I was looking for in terms of, like, it had a process that wasn't completely under my control, that was mostly driven by the material rather than my designs, and it had a bunch of limitations. The inflatables are really limited by how many layers and how big you can make them and the weight of the piece when it's hot. Like, you can only kind of pick up and inflate something so much. And when you start breaking those limits, you end up with stuff that really doesn't have the same kind of three-dimensional objecthood that a successful one does. And like, judging what a successful one is also kind of an interesting endeavor. It would produce this family of forms that had their own vocabulary because of those restrictions and because of the way that they were made. And so the limits were actually giving it the ability to kind of have a conversation. And that's probably one of the reasons that I've kept making them. It's also allowed me to like start in a very limited way to experiment with color, which is something that I find very foreign myself. Like, color still seems to be kind of an arbitrary choice to me for a lot of things, and kind of like figuring out why colors would work with particular things and why things go together, and like kind of having the courage to actually use bright colors on things is all kind of something that's kept me interested in them. And they've certainly gotten better and more sophisticated as time goes on. I still like making them. I still make them kind of regularly when I don't have anything else to do. And I think they are getting to the point where they are they're almost becoming craft objects, which is something I never kind of set out to do. But they've gotten to a very kind of finished, presentable state. I think that's interesting. That experience with the Hellers was fantastic. I wish I'd had more time with Doug and Katya, because they were far and away kind of the most engaged and informed and curious set of gallerists that I've worked with. It was really actually very rewarding. I felt lucky to actually get to work with them for that exhibition.
You also expanded on those concepts in Luftschlösser, held at Traver Gallery in 2020, by showcasing your sculptures within a living concept space. Tell us about that exhibition.
That was wonderful, and Sarah Traver is fantastic. She's managed to maintain this kind of the backbone of Studio Glass in Seattle, exhibition-wise, since William Traver has handed off the gallery to her pretty much entirely, but the two of them have been such a consistent force for support and excellence with Seattle glass artists. One of the easiest ways to make a glass object less interesting is to put it on a white pedestal and put it in a room full of other white pedestals. I've had several of those kind of exhibitions, particularly with the inflatables, where I'll ship it off, or I'll even go and install it, and I'll look at it, and I'm like, it kind of ruins the continuity and the context, and putting those objects on a white pedestal really gives them nothing to talk to, and nothing else in the room of interest. And one of the things that was really neat, we actually reached out to a local interior design furniture showroom. It immediately made everything much more lively. It gave all the pieces something to talk to. It let you kind of see them in the wild. It was taking the tiger out of the zoo and putting it back in the jungle. And I don't ever want to do a pedestal show again. After that, it was a really nice thing. It kind of allowed those objects to look like they were part of life, which was kind of the goal.
We'll return to Matthew Szösz in just a moment. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass. AACG is a leading resource for glass collectors, artists, gallerists, museum personnel, educators, and others on all things related to glass art. Its mission is to further the development and appreciation of art made from glass. It also provides a place for the glass community to have robust conversation around glass art through its weekly virtual programs, and provides grants and scholarships. Membership gives glass lovers access to many members-only benefits. For more information and to become a member of AACG, visit aacgglass.org. To assist in the continued documentation of glass and glass artists, please make sure you're following on Instagram and Facebook, and subscribe to our new YouTube channel. If you'd like to make a one-time donation, visit talkingoutyourglass.com and click on Donate. And now, we return to Matthew Szösz. Your exhibition, Structures from the Melting World, was held at the Glass Factory Boda in Sweden in 2022. Talk about the body of work of yours that was on view that was reminiscent of a glass paper chain. I love those works.
Thank you. Yeah, that was an interesting exhibition to be part of. It was a group exhibition put together by Max Siren. He would be what we would call an artistic director. There, he's been curating a number of shows and doing a bunch of other things for the museum at Boda. I had a chance to go there when I was in Sweden just a couple of months ago and talk to everybody. And it's Boda is in what used to be called the Crystal Kingdom in Sweden. It's this area of Småland where a lot of the big glass factories were. Bodo's there, Costa Orofers, and that industry and those factories is essentially gone now. I think Costa may still be making a few things, but for the most part, all those factories have closed, and there's no more industrial production in that region, but the area has kind of survived, and it's become this place where it's kind of nurturing a bunch of kind of small studio glass and artistic practices in those factories or near those factories. There's a lot of kind of infrastructure for the glass world there, and there's also a certain amount of interest, and it's kind of really nice to see this. It was kind of a physical version of kind of what's happening across Europe, where the European glass industry has either faltered or died out, but kind of independent, small studio glass makers are figuring out ways to kind of survive and keep making things within those traditions, which is really nice. And outside of those traditions and all around those traditions. And it's very different than kind of the way that glass working is kind of, or glass workers are made in the U.S., which is primarily through universities. So it was very nice. Anyway, the Euplectella is that the piece that I put together for that show is one of the few times that I've produced a finished video work of a particular piece, and Euplectella was something that I had I would do as a demonstration for years. The first time I did it was at a residency at Australian National University, which was another excellent residency that I thoroughly enjoyed. Wallabies. And it's similar to the inflatables in that it just starts with often salvaged window glass. A lot of the things that I do, there's an enormous amount of failure and experimentation involved. Failure is a fantastic friend, and something that I believe in very thoroughly. If you're failing at things, you're learning. If you're succeeding, then you're kind of just proving what you already knew. And because of that failure and the constant need to redo things, I'm always looking for the cheapest available glass, and recycled window panes is definitely one of those. And it's similar to that in the same thing where you're treating the glass as a flat material, as a sheet material, and getting it warm enough to the point where you can kind of activate its flexibility and its ability to behave not like a sheet material, and you get that moment of transition between the two that does something nice. And in this case, it is like paper dolls. Instead of putting sheets together and inflating them from the inside, you put sheets together and then stretch them apart like an accordion. So the Euplectellas are just a very simple kind of mesh net of like you would see in a lot of paper or expanded metal. And the really nice thing about it is that gravity gives it this wonderful parabolic shape in two directions. So you end up with this very kind of graceful, almost ephemeral thing that hangs in the middle of the space. But it's also kind of, because of its nature, doomed and transitory, because it's much too big to anneal, and I don't think you could put it down. It wouldn't support its own weight. It's a bit like a whale on shore. So it just hangs there, and then slowly starts to tear itself apart as the annealing stresses take over, and ultimately the entire thing will shatter into these very small pieces if you just leave it alone, which is exactly what I do, and it usually takes 15 or 20 minutes. And I kind of like that sequence of events as a narrative, as an autobiography. I know autobiography is maybe a little too presumptive, but there's this kind of birth and flowering and these moments of beauty, and then there's a lot of decay and then death at the end of it. And that arc is deeply relatable. And it was nice to make it, the reason for making a video out of it was to take it out of the hot shop. Kind of because it's got to come right out of a kiln and be put together very quickly. It really can't happen anywhere other than the glass shop. And that's very limiting in terms of your ability to kind of display it and the ability of people to do it and like kind of what's around it. So in the video it's still in the hot shop, but the hot shop isn't as much of an obstacle to experiencing it. It's still relatively a limited experience compared to the actual object. It allows that particular piece to escape its the trap of where it has to be made. So we were talking about Objects USA 2024 and the 40 Under 40 exhibition that the Smithsonian put together. And they're two very fundamentally different exhibitions. I also, it was both of them were great experiences in working with the curators. 40 Under 40 is much more of a kind of curatorial approach. It's a museum, and all the curators have this kind of academic background, and they were really 40 Under 40 was a whole bunch of different craft disciplines with relatively young makers from across the U.S. The curatorial decisions were very informed and were very much both about like the history of craft, the craft process, innovations within the craft world, and kind of they were very interested in what the makers were doing in relationship to kind of what was going on in the craft scene. Objects is kind of a much more commercially driven exhibition, I think. Everything in there has a particular flavor that I think probably has as much to do with the marketing of the venue that it was in than kind of an interest in surveying American craft. I don't know if I'm being particularly fair to it. I think if you look at the objects in those two exhibitions, you'll find that the ones in 40 Under 40 are much more varied in their kind of approach and aesthetic than the Objects 2024. That being said, I think it's fantastic that somebody is mounting survey exhibitions on an ambitious scale in America these days. I think there is a lot to look at and a lot of really wonderful artwork that just gets overlooked constantly, and a lot of really just kind of interesting practices and people making that artwork that don't get the kind of attention that they should. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll be seeing government funding for any of that anytime soon, which is essentially at least a significant part of the Smithsonian funding. That the donors, particularly to the Renwick, have done a fantastic job of promoting that institution and keeping it moving forward over the years. Kind of the nice thing and the interesting thing about the Objects exhibition for me is that having it happen in that commercial context is somewhat refreshing in the idea that we might actually still have American patrons for those things, which is kind of essential if we want to continue to make and investigate our lives and the objects that are around us in that kind of tradition and in that particular mode of thinking. So it is really nice that our company and their associated personae have managed to put together that show and promote it as well as they did. It was a very rewarding experience.
Your large gold mirror meteor is on permanent display within the central tower of the Glazenhuis in Belgium. Talk about this work and its creation.
That was an enormous amount of fun. The creation of that was kind of it's whenever you start working at any size, there's always kind of a confluence of things that have to happen. You need to have a project that you want to do, but you also need to have a place and a time and some kind of funding in place to actually do it one way or another. And the meteor was something that ever since I made the iceberg for the Starworks residency, I kind of wanted to do another kind of hanging glass piece the same way. And a meteorite was kind of an obvious thing, but I could never, it seemed kind of an arbitrary and unthought out kind of thing. During the pandemic and kind of the all of our recent history as Americans, kind of experiencing that, and then thinking of the meteor not as just something that I could hang in the sky, but thinking of it as kind of an apocalyptic event, like kind of the meteor's it's an extinction event. The Chicxulub meteorite that ended what we think of as the dinosaur age. It seemed to be in tune with the kind of end of the world, or the all things falling apart mood that I was in 2022, and it seemed much more appropriate, and it seemed like that might be a reason to actually make it. And then I also kind of I found at the same time, there's an asteroid called Psyche 16. It's one of the earliest asteroids. It's the 16th heavenly object ever found on the asteroid belt, and for a little while they've since revised exactly what they think of it. They had decided that it was mostly made out of gold and nickel, and because it had perhaps been the center of a small planetoid rather than something else. So it was a core of a small planet, and so it was all kind of heavy metals. And in fact, there'd be enough gold in it to, I think, give every human on Earth something like $12 billion worth of gold, which of course would make gold worthless. But apart from that, so it's kind of this just giant chunk of gold floating in the sky, and it immediately attracted a whole lot of interest in people who wanted to go out and get it. Most notably, Elon Musk sent up a rocket a couple of years ago that's traveling there currently to explore the possibilities of mining it. And that human response seemed to me to be predictable, incredibly short-sighted, and a massive failure to learn from past mistakes. Throughout human history, gold has been something that has led to death, destruction, and exploitation in kind of... there are few other things that we've killed as many people over, or destroyed as many cultures over. And in particular, it made me think of kind of the conquistadors' obsession with gold, and what that meant for the peoples of North America, which was almost entirely the complete destruction of their culture, probably the most successful genocide waged in written history, anyway. And in particular, there's the ransom of Atahualpa, who was an Incan emperor that the conquistadors took hostage and eventually killed after the ransom was paid. which is the single largest ransom ever paid. And they had simply they designated a room and said, fill it with gold and twice with silver, and we'll give you your emperor back. Anyway, so there's this kind of like confluence of ideas between the ideas of gold, the ideas of the asteroid, and the asteroid as this object that kind of like could be a symbol for the end of the world. And all those things kind of got to go into this particular object in a very nice way. You know, like there's a bunch of kind of confluence and crossover, and none of it is fully defined. So it gives you kind of a lot of freedom to think about those connections and kind of what it might mean to you at the place. And it's also kind of like this big sparkly object that's kind of attractive and a little seductive maybe, and you know, aesthetic. And I also like that about it too, that like this idea, one of the big problems with our self-initiated extinction event is that we're really attracted to it, and like, you know, that's why we're doing it, is because it's the shiny object. And then I was lucky in that I was in Poland teaching at the Janus Gepertz Academy in Wrocław with Marżena Kremenska in her program, and they have a very nice gallery system that's funded by the city, the BWA, that has a particular glass and ceramics gallery run by Mika Drozdowska. That gave me the opportunity to have a show there, so I had this big space to fill, and I had a university with a shop and students to work in, and I had an intern named Ricardo from Bornholm, so I had free labor, a poor guy, so I made that for about $5,000 total. In materials and laser cut steel, and a lot of free labor from Ricardo and of course myself, and actually a bunch of my students volunteered to help get it finished, and we put it into Poland. And then once that show was done, I contacted Jeroen Meijs over at the Glazenhuis to see if he would want it, so I wouldn't have to just throw it out at the end of the show. And he was enthusiastic about it, so we brought it to Belgium and hung it there. I think currently, actually, they're renovating the Glazenhuis, so I don't think it's up right now, but hopefully it'll go back up in a year or two. But yeah, that was it was kind of interesting because it, you know, most of the parts of it were actually fairly cheap. All of the gold is just achieved with car window tinting film, and it was all built relatively quickly. I think the actual building of it took maybe a month and a half.
So, Matthew, what have been the most important discoveries in your experimentations with glass?
That's a good question, and really, not one I'm probably going to give a satisfyingly concrete answer to. One is that glass and all materials really are just endless. There is no limit on what you can do with them, with even a little bit of kind of applied curiosity. And the other is that it's not really important. The glass itself and the material is not really important as much as just the experimentation, the investigation, and the constant learning that's available. And you know, to me, that kind of continuous process of learning about the world and about myself and about a particular material is the most rewarding and important part of any art practice. It can be a little bit selfish and a little bit navel-gazing, in that, like, most of the payoff is really for yourself, and how much use you are to the rest of the world is really reliant on how well you can kind of communicate your thoughts to the rest of the world. So it's really kind of dependent on that. If you're kind of familiar with Maslow's pyramid of needs, artists are up at the very top of that, along with priests, as things that are completely unnecessary but are the actual goal of the pyramid of the rest of society. We're expensive, we're very privileged, but we're also kind of supposed to be the conscience of whatever society there is, that's put us in that position where we're essentially the wise people at the tip that kind of should be able to have some influence on how that engine of culture and industry that has funded us and put us up there gets used. We're supposed to be the people that are kind of telling the rest of culture who we are, and what our values are, and what's important to being a human, and what being a relatively aware, and I don't want to say better, but useful, non-harmful human. That's about the best we could really do as humans, is to be harmless, which is something we're very, very far away from. That's kind of the goal of artistic practice, is to kind of realize some of those ideas and be able to, at least in some limited way, express that to other people. And it's also never finished. It's always ongoing. Hopefully you get better at it through life. It's not guaranteed. And it's also a very privileged place. You know, art is incredibly hard work, and it's, for the most part, it's incredibly hard work without external reward. You don't get paid for it. You don't get respected for it often, but it's personally very rewarding, and it's actually, I think, culturally essential. And how much any particular culture listens to its artists and its philosophers and its writers is really an indicator of the success of that particular culture. And that is a really lucky spot to be in, to be able to do that. And it was something that we used to kind of value institutionally. It's something that Europe still does. Europe has had the great privilege since mostly the Second World War to not need to spend an enormous amount of its budget on defense. I think that's changing now. I think the gun makers are about to have a windfall year, which gets a little bit back to that art being the opposite of war. But Europe has been able to put culture in a particular place, and it's no accident that a lot of those European countries are always listed as the happiest ones in the world, because they've been able to spend more time thinking about who they are, thinking about what they value, and thinking about how they want to spend their lives, rather than either working or fighting. And that, I think, may be a winning strategy for humans. But if history is any guide, it's not one we're likely to adopt anytime soon.
How did you get comfortable with failure? I read somewhere you often make a piece 5 times before one is successful.
Well, 5 times is good. That's not bad at all. That's a 20% success rate. That's great. I mean, failure. I think with glass, in particular, failure is something you get used to very quickly, especially when you're learning. So much of what you do ends up on the floor, whether you're in the kiln or in the hot shop. Certainly in the hot shop, and you can just kind of see how casual glass blowers are with what they make. And so that kind of getting used to that is kind of essential to glass making, I think. And it's essential to progress, certainly. Kind of safety is the opposite of, or the limit to progress. If you want to keep moving forward, you have to stay uncomfortable, and you have to stay. You have to keep doing things that are just outside of your actual abilities. So failure is kind of inherent with that. And kind of once you work that out, you start to recognize that failure is actually the indicator of success. Like when things go wrong, you're actually learning something. If I take my sketchbook and I make a drawing, and then I go into the studio and I make the thing and it looks exactly like the drawing, then that's a bit of a letdown. Like I haven't actually made any progress. I could have just stopped with the drawing, but so kind of once you do that, you start welcoming failure and looking for failure and looking for the ways that things fail, and the reasons that things fail, and every failure is a particular piece of information that you can use to make your next failure. So yeah, I mean, I think if you're curious, if you're wanting to learn and wanting to improve, then failure is immediately what you gravitate towards. It's the thing that's that you don't know.
So, Matthew, what's coming up for you in 2026? And tell us a bit about your ongoing commission at CTAC.
So, 2026, I just had a very nice time in Sweden. That was good. Hopefully the CTAC project, this phase 2 of the CTAC project, will be going into production over the summer and should be installed in the early fall. And then I had the chance to go to a residency in Portugal that Maria Morales-Lam has put together at Low Invisible Studio, which should be very nice. And then I will be teaching in November and December in China that Ji Huang has engineered. He's an excellent artist, and he's been bringing a lot of kind of American and European glass people to China to teach at the universities there. And I'll be at Nanjing and Jilin. At the end of the year, I'm unemployed. The CTAC project currently, it's if it gets installed, when it gets installed this fall, it will have been about 3 years of working almost entirely on one project, and it's been very nice and very, very kind of rewarding, and very stressful, but a lot of it's very different in that kind of working on a big project, you don't have that room for experimentation, and the things that you're learning are different than what you would be learning in your studio practice, and they're perhaps a bit more practical and political. Like you learn to deal with people, you learn to deal with frustration, you learn to run a business, but it also gives you the opportunity to make things on a different scale, which I highly recommend if you can. It allows you to kind of like change the way that you're thinking about objects. And in the CTAC project in particular, I got the opportunity to kind of make an environment rather than just an object. So for the CTAC project, what I've done is I've taken a little chunk of the airport, this kind of mezzanine area that's over the Alaska baggage claim, and kind of turned it into a very abstracted version of Jonah's whale. And kind of the impetus for that was the kind of the space itself, because it's not a space that was built for artwork. It was just a space where there was an opportunity to put artwork in during renovation, and it's actually kind of a horrible space for artwork. It's this kind of it's all drywall. It's all kind of low ceilings. There's no natural light. It's a very weird transitional space where you can never see all of the space at once from any angle in particular. But and so when I went there, I was terrified of trying to build something in this space. But I did realize that it was kind of a small and close enough space that you could actually make it so that the person walked into the artwork and try to kind of use that slightly claustrophobic, strange area as part of what the artwork would be. And kind of once you think of like travelers and interior space, kind of Jonah's whale is a little bit of a natural jump. And it also, I mean, there's the very obvious kind of analogy of getting on an airplane and getting into the whale. You know, there's kind of a very physical resemblance there, but it also, you know, you can think of the inside of the whale in the biblical story. It's a meta space. It's not a real space. You know, there is no space inside a whale, but it's kind of a place that Jonah goes to that's a sacred area, and he's given a chance to kind of contemplate his relationship to God and to himself and all these other things. And that idea of kind of religious spaces as meta spaces is a very old one. You know, like the rose windows in cathedrals are intended to change the light inside the cathedral so that when you step in, you feel that you're in a different place than the outside world. The shimenawas that I mentioned earlier are the barrier between the secular space and the sacred space in the Shinto temple. And that kind of particular thing, being in God's house, is something that is a very old idea, and it also is kind of very literal for a lot of airports. It's really kind of the airport experience. You know, airports a lot of times, especially if you're traveling through them, it's a little bit like getting on an elevator, you know, where you're in the real world on one floor, and then you step into this little box, and you're closed in this little box with music playing for a few minutes, and the doors open and you're somewhere else. You know, and it's this weird like little limbo that you've just stepped into and then stepped out of. And airports will be that way. Like, you know, I've never been to Chicago, but I've gone through Chicago O'Hare more times than I can count. And it's this weird little space that exists maybe within the idea of Chicago, but I've never, you know, been there. So there's that kind of experience, and there's also, that's what duty free is. You don't pay tax on your booze because you're nowhere, and nobody can tax you on it. And there's a more sinister side to that called free ports that you should look up at some point if you know, want to horrify yourself for a little bit about the relationship of art and money and corruption. But those all seemed like really nice analogies to make for the airport. And in the end, though, it also had to kind of be something that, you know, it had certain parameters. It needed a suspended sculpture, it needed a light inside it. And it was also going to be something that most people will see for probably 10 seconds or less as they transit through, usually while stressed out or annoyed or tired. So that the physical object had to kind of like satisfy those people. So there's a pair of this. I've been using this dichroic metal coated glass that's produced by a company in Stromberg, Germany, Prinz Optics. It's a really fantastic material. There's some of it right there. That they originally produced it for scientific instruments, so they produce an incredibly consistent and flawless color layer on the glass, and their color filters break the color spectrum into two halves. They can you can pick whatever two halves you want, but you can't kind of like change the relationship between colors. And half of it's transmitted and half of it's reflected at various degrees of reflection. So it creates this kind of like dual colored glass that shifts a little bit as you move around it. It changes colors. So it's a very kind of magical, semi-transparent glass material. And so there's a couple of large walls around the mezzanine that are kind of meant to be the outside of the whale's body, and if you're on the mezzanine, you can kind of be inside it. And that was phase one that went in Christmas of last year, 2025, and that's up now. And then I'm working on the suspended sculpture that hangs inside the mezzanine area. That's kind of a stylized whale mouth holding a pearl that comes from an old Hebrew interpretation of the Jonah story, kind of experimental. The Hebrews have this kind of wonderful tradition where they just like riff on Bible stories. That it was proposed as the way that Jonah saw as this giant glowing pearl that the whale had swallowed, as the light that he had to live and contemplate by while he was inside the whale. So that's kind of hanging there in the middle with this canopy that's the whale's mouth, but it's also kind of a mirror chandelier, a chandelier where you have a single light source that gets reflected in a lot of different kind of mirrored things, which is an odd but old tradition of objects, and that's what we're busy making now. I'm busy making now.
So, what questions have you answered about glass?
None, I hope. I don't think glass or art in particular is something that lends itself to the answering of questions. It lends itself very well to the asking of questions. I think a successful artwork gets the viewer to ask questions about things, or at least leaves the viewer uncertain, leaves us the ability to continue to think about it after we've stopped looking at it. That's really kind of the ideal thing. If you make an artwork that's kind of immediately understandable and immediately complete for the viewer, it also can be immediately dismissed by the viewer because they've gotten all of their answers out of it. And I think, one that leaves a little bit of uncertainty, questioning, or even a little bit of confusion in its wake is one that will stay with people, and they will continue to think about over time. Some artwork is incredibly satisfying to look at, like a Bernini or a Michelangelo. They just radiate this kind of competence and talent and grace. But they also, you don't have any question about what you're looking at. You know immediately kind of what it is. And that it's a very kind of like satisfying experience, kind of like eating a brownie. But when it's over, it's over. Or at least it's over until the next time you eat a brownie. Or whatever. And then, there's nothing wrong with brownies. But the things that kind of like stay with you are the things that you don't understand, the things that you keep thinking about. When I was in graduate school, I had a policy of getting out artist monographs from the library of artists that I really didn't like. Primarily because if I really didn't like them, I didn't understand what they were doing. And a lot of them, after looking through their book for a month or two, I still didn't like, and I didn't think they were doing anything all that important. But enough of them, again, like 20% success rate is phenomenal. I think it was considerably less than that, but there were enough of them that like by looking at it, I could kind of start to figure out what they were trying to say. And, for those other artists, the failure is probably on my end, not theirs. There were enough new ideas that I could actually kind of understand and start to relate to and get more insight about those works after kind of like sitting with them for a month or two. And those were really valuable. Like, that was the kind of stuff that like helps me grow, or it expands my idea of the world, or like expands my idea of other people or the ways that other people think. And it's not immediately pleasurable like the brownie, but it's much more sustaining, I think, in the long term.
Thanks for tuning in to Talking Out Your Glass. Many thanks to our sponsors: His Glassworks Incorporated, Penland School of Craft, Bullseye Glass Company, Heller Gallery, Schott, Wet Dog Glass, and the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass. Stay tuned for more great episodes, including Cedric Mitchell and John Lubto. Thanks for subscribing on YouTube and following on Instagram and Facebook. Until next time, stay glassy.